The Case of Secrets, Chapter 4 by Alfred M. Struthers. Chapter 4, A.V. Vanished. In 1862, at the height of his career, Alistair Raven simply disappeared in what was considered the strangest missing persons case of its time. One of the greatest architectural masters of the 19th century was gone without a trace. There was no motive, there were no clues. The authorities investigated from every angle, but came up empty-handed each time. The man had simply ceased to exist. Because he had no surviving family, no grieving wife or children to push the investigation, it eventually stalled. To this day, it was still officially listed as unsolved. Friends and members of the architectural community were outraged, but the police simply had nothing to go on. No crime had been committed, and although his work would stand for decades to come, Alistair Raven would never be heard from again. Until now. The thought sent a shiver through Nathan's body. And he shifted in the chair. He's reaching out to me. His train of thought was broken when he heard someone calling his name. Nathan! Dinner! He checked the clock on his bedside table. He had been reading for nearly 3 hours, a new Nathan Cole world record. But it left him with even more questions. The book led him to this point. But what did it mean? What was it that Raven wanted him to find? Those questions haunted him through dinner as well into his dreams that night. The next morning, Nathan sauntered out to the bus stop, preoccupied with a growing list of nagging questions. Gina was waiting on the sidewalk, watching for the bus, and never saw him cut across the lawn behind her. Hey, he grunted. She jumped at the sound, dropping her backpack. Don't do that, she snarled. Sorry, he said, unable to keep from laughing. She scooped up her backpack with an angry swipe and turned her back to him. That was it. Now she definitely wasn't going to tell him about the calendar. Let him waste more time on his foolish notion. Then we'll see who's laughing. During last block, Gina was in the library, working at one of the long tables. Nathan came in walking over, and she didn't notice him until he pulled up a chair and sat down beside her. In his hands there was a large book that he plunked down on the table with a thud that echoed across the room. Without a word, he opened it up and started scanning the pages. She did her best to ignore him, but something about this didn't add up. He was completely focused on reading a book, of all things. Seriously? Nathan Cole? Reading? She turned her head and twirled a strand of hair behind her ear, casually looking in his direction. What is he so interested in? The book was too far away, so she flipped her pencil into the air and it flew sideways, hitting his arm. Oh, sorry, she giggled. But Nathan was too busy reading to notice. She slowly reached over to pick it up, taking time to scan everything on the page. Staring back at her was the same faded picture of Alistair Raven that she'd seen in Nathan's basement. The very sight of the man gave her goosebumps all over again. Is that the only picture they have of that guy? She shuddered and quickly picked up her pencil, then went back to her own work. Nathan studied the page for some time and then turned to the next, examining every word, every picture with the utmost concentration. Gina pretended not to notice what he was doing, but every now and then she'd sneak a casual glance his way. Nathan reached the bottom of the page and looked up at the clock on the wall. Whoa, time to go, he said, quickly closing the book. Just as he got up from his chair, Gina stopped what she was doing and looked up from the table. She stared across the room with a blank expression on her face, as if there were something on the far wall that she was trying to read. Nathan? She said calmly. He had already started to walk away and never saw the change come over her until he turned around. Yeah? Wait. She was sitting completely still, like her entire body had been dipped in wax. What's wrong? Can I have a look at that book? Sure, he said, studying the blank look on her face. He walked back to the table, and that's when she snapped out of her trance. She turned and looked at him with a mystified look on her face. Show me what you were reading. Yeah, no problem, he said slowly. Then he set the book down on the table, watching her face the whole time. Clearly something had spooked her. She never took her eyes from the book as he opened it up and began turning pages. When he found the chapter he'd been reading, he slid the book towards her. I need to check something, she said, pulling it closer. Take your time, he said, watching the expression on her face as she carefully inspected each page. Alistair Raven had built numerous buildings, many of which were pictured in the book, but one of them still held her attention for a full minute. She studied it closely, then her eyes dropped to the caption just below the photo. Polk County Courthouse, Colfax, Virginia, 1852. Before Nathan could ask her what was so special about that photo, she abruptly picked up the book and walked away from the table. "Where are you?" he began to ask, both arms open in a "what gives" gesture, but she just kept walking and jumped from the chair. As he jumped up from the chair, "Wait for me!" She lugged the book over to the photocopier and was just positioning it on the scanner glass when he arrived. "What are you doing?" His curiosity was on full alert. "Making a copy." "No, really, like I didn't already." "Shh." She watched the photocopy slowly feed out of the side of the machine and then picked it up and gave it a quick inspection. "What is it?" he pleaded. She folded the paper and said, "A possible link." "Just tell me," Nathan insisted, a short time later as he followed Gina out to the bus. "I will, when we get home," she replied. "How many times do I have to say it? But why not now?" She stopped walking and turned to face him. She didn't even know why she was doing this. "Because I'm not sure, okay? It's just a hunch. And if I'm wrong, you'll never let me hear the end of it." "How about just a small clue?" he said, gesturing with his thumb and forefinger. If she had information about the book, he wanted to know it. Now. She exhaled loudly. "You know something?" she started to say. Patience had never been one of Nathan Cole's strong suits. "What?" he said defensively. She took a deep breath, then griped. "Oh, never mind." She made an abrupt turn and climbed the stairs to the bus. He didn't ask her again after that. When they got home, Gina made a beeline across the lawn toward her house, Nathan following close behind, silently. She went straight into the kitchen, dropped her backpack on a chair, and then headed to the refrigerator for a drink. "No soda for you," she said, taking a can of ginger ale off the door. "How come?" he whined. She opened the can and took a long, thirst-quenching sip. "Is this about yesterday?" She continued to ignore him as she walked over and pulled the calendar off the wall. He immediately sat up in the chair. "What are you doing with that?" "You'll see." She brought the calendar over to the table. "Wait a minute. Did you—" "Quiet," she said, handing him the soda can. He took one look at it and scoffed, then quickly set it aside as she placed the calendar on the table and flipped to the back. "What's that?" he asked, moving closer. "October." "No kidding." She pointed to the bottom of the page and then began fishing through her backpack. "What's this supposed to mean?" he asked, casually glancing at the large banner that ran across the bottom of the page. "An advertisement." "Gee, thanks. I'm pretty sure I figured that out already." She pulled the photocopy out of her backpack. "Very funny. Now move over." He exhaled loudly and moved aside as she sat down and put the photocopy of the library book next to the calendar. Then she leaned forward and began to examine each one very carefully. Nathan craned his neck, trying to see what she was looking at, but her head was blocking his view. This went on for some time until he couldn't stand it any longer. "An advertisement for what?" "Owen's Hardware," she answered without looking up. "It's their 75th anniversary." "Big deal." "Probably is," she replied, trying her best to tune him out. Her full attention was on the advertisement, which included a photo of Owen's Hardware on the day it opened for business. "What is it?" Nathan asked impatiently. She stood up and said, "See for yourself." He sat down and considered the advertisement briefly, then shrugged. "There," she said, directing him to the left side of the photo. It was taken from the far end of the street, and from that angle, the front of another building was visible. She could hardly contain her excitement. "See it?" Gina asked. "Yeah, this building on the corner, the front entrance. It looks like the one in the photocopy, right?" Nathan looked over at the photocopy, then back to the advertisement. "They do look similar, but these pictures are pretty fuzzy. Hold on." She quickly dug into her backpack and pulled out an old wood-handled magnifying glass. "You carry a magnifying glass in your backpack? Who are you, Sherlock Holmes?" "No, I took it to school for—" she began. "Do you want to use it or not?" "Yes, please," he said in a disturbed voice. Sherlock. She hesitated and then handed it to him. Clown. He moved in close and began scrutinizing both pictures, comparing every detail as if committing them to memory. Well, she asked. They don't just look alike, he said, his face inches from the photo. He sat up, a look of utter shock on his face. They're identical. Are you sure? There was a measure of doubt in her voice. He nodded. Here, I'll show you. She stepped closer as he positioned the magnifying glass above the photocopy. See this pointed arch? It's called an oogie arch. Okay. And these fancy designs in the top corners, they're called spandrels. If you say so. He went back to the photo in the advertisement, holding the magnifying glasses just inches above it. Have a look. She leaned in close and studied the photo intently. Then she stood up, with the same look of astonishment she'd just seen on his face. You're right. They're the same. How did you know? He asked, eyeing her suspiciously. Know what? About the picture in the calendar. I noticed it, she said casually, looking away. When? You never looked at it in my dad's office. In fact, you said, all right, she blurted out. I came home and I looked at it after I left your house. Nathan slowly nodded his head. And you saw that other picture in the book I was reading in the library? Well, I peeked. Just a little, she confessed. When you threw your pencil at me, it wasn't a question. She tried to hide a guilty smile. You know what that means, he was about to burst. Here we go, she thought. You did it, he exclaimed, catching her off guard. This is the link. It explains why the book was on the table in my dad's office. The very thought gave her the chills all over again. I can't believe you found it. Hey, don't sound so surprised, she said in an offended voice. I'm not. It's just, what I mean is, you are so awesome. Well, of course, she said, blushing. Now that you mention it. He set the magnifying glass down on the table and glanced at his watch. It was almost 3:30 p.m. What's the matter? She asked. Nothing. Do you want to take a ride? A ride? What are you talking about? Come on, he said, grabbing the photocopy from the table. Wait, where are we going? There, he replied, pointing to the advertisement. 10 minutes later, they were on their bikes and headed into town. Owen's Hardware wasn't hard to find. It took up every square inch of the street except for the lot on the corner. That space was occupied by a monstrous vine-covered building, the same in the calendar photo. Wow, Gina said as she stared up at the towering structure. There was no other word to describe it. You can say that again, Nathan answered. Come on. They left their bikes on the sidewalk and climbed up the massive front steps for a closer look. You know what's weird? Gina asked when they reached the top step. I don't remember this building being here. Me neither, Nathan replied. But do you ever come down here? To this part of town? Nope. Exactly, he said, turning his attention back to the building. Many of the architectural details were locked in his memory. After reading the book, up close they were even more spectacular. Dripstone, he whispered, staring up at the second floor of the building. His expression was a mix of confidence and awe. What did you say? See those hood moldings on the windows? Hood what? Hood moldings, up there, at the top of the windows. Okay, she said, looking intently at a window on the second floor. They're called dripstone. They throw off the rain. She turned and stared at Nathan for a long moment without speaking. It looks like him. It sounds like him. Since when did he? It all fits, he said, nodding his head. What do you mean? Fits what? Let's go, he said, as he turned and hurried back down the steps. There's something I need to find out. How did Nathan Cole suddenly know everything before her? Wait, she shouted, but he was already on his bike and pedaling down the sidewalk towards Owen's Hardware. By the time she caught up to him, he was already off his bike and walking towards the front door. Will you wait? She yelled as she leaned her bike up against the front wall of the store. Owen's Hardware was a huge store, but when they walked in, they only saw one employee, a short, older man with thin gray hair. He was standing behind the front counter, bagging a customer's order. Gina took one look and then stopped walking. The man was wearing a blue apron, spattered and smudged with different colors of paint. His thick, wire-framed glasses made his eyes look bigger than normal. Mr. Thonis from science class? Mr. Thonis was a big fan of the apron, even on the days when they weren't doing some bizarre experiment and nearly burning down the school. She wondered if this lookalike would be more patient and less prone to shouting. When he saw them come through the door, the man stopped what he was doing long enough to say, "Sorry, kids, we're all done with donations. Try me next year." Then he turned back to the customer, shaking his head while he spoke. "It never ends. I swear there's a kid in here every day looking for a handout." The customer shot a quick glance over his shoulder at Nathan and Gina, then took his purchase and hurried out the door. The man in the blue apron grumbled something under his breath, picked up a clipboard, and then padded over to the paint section. "Come on," Nathan whispered to Gina. He started to walk in that direction. "Wait," she blurted out, grabbing his arm and pulling him back. "What are you doing? Don't worry, just follow me." "Nathan," she pleaded, but he pulled away from her and kept walking. The man in the blue apron was standing in the paint aisle, closely inspecting a row of paint cans up on the shelf. When he found the one he wanted, he took it down and started back up the aisle. That's when he noticed Nathan standing near the paintbrush display. "Very busy today, son," he said as he hoisted the gallon of paint up on the workbench. "Lots of paint to mix." He consulted his clipboard momentarily and was reaching for a pry tool to open the can when he knocked over a large container of paint stars. "Well, that's just perfect," he groaned as they tumbled to the floor with a clatter. Nathan quickly moved in and gathered them up. "Thanks," the man said with a surprised look. "You don't see many people do that these days. Help out, I mean." "No problem," Nathan said, handing him the bundle. He noticed the name Ken embroidered in red stitching on the front pocket of the apron. Ken saw him reading it and said, "Ken Owens, store owner. Nice to meet you. Nathan Cole." Then he quickly added, "I'm not here for a donation. I just came in to ask you about the building on the corner." "The building on the corner? You mean the old courthouse?" "Courthouse?" As soon as he heard the word, Nathan felt a jolt of nervous excitement. Yeah, I didn't know that's what it was." From several feet away, he heard Gina clear her throat. "Oh, sorry, this is my friend Gina." Ken gave her a quick nod. "What is it you want to know?" "Do you have any idea when it was built?" Nathan asked. "Well, let's see," Ken said. "I think it was back around the turn of the century, maybe a little earlier." "Do you know who built it?" Gina chimed in. "Well," Ken said, "that's a very good question. I can't say I ever knew. Strange as that is. But I imagine they keep that sort of thing on file down at the town hall." Nathan checked his watch. It was almost 4:30 p.m. He was wondering if the town hall stayed open this late when Ken added, "You know, I do seem to remember something about the builder's name. Nathan froze. Say it. "It's not much, but I remember it had a V in it." He looked down at the floor, thinking intently. "Oh, what was that name?" "Would it be listed inside the building, like on a plaque or something?" Gina asked. "It's possible," Ken said. "But how are you going to get inside it to see it? That building hasn't been used in years. The doors are all locked." Nathan frowned. "Locked?" "That's right. Ever since they built that new courthouse across town." "You were saying something about the builder's name?" Nathan asked. "Right," Ken replied. He looked down at the floor again, scratching the side of his head as he tried to remember. As the seconds ticked away, it became clear that he wasn't going to dredge it up from his memory anytime soon. "You know," he said, "you could always check the front of the building. He put his initials on it." Hearing that, Nathan and Gina turned and raced towards the door. "Thanks!" Nathan shouted. "Yeah, thank you!" Gina yelled as she followed him out. "Hold on!" he called to them. "There's more!" But it was no use. Nathan and Gina had already climbed on their bikes and were gone. "Take a good look," he said to the empty store as he went back to work. "It won't be there for long." Nathan and Gina rode back to the corner. They parked their bikes at the foot of the steps, then raced up them towards the entrance. When they were almost to the top, they stopped and looked up, searching the front of the building from top to bottom. "There," Nathan said, pointing to a small horizontal slab of stone built into the front of the building below the peak. It was just two letters, AV. Neither of them said a word. They stared at the nameplate for a full minute as the reality of the situation sank in. Someone had built this amazing structure, but it wasn't Alistair Raven. Slowly, Nathan's shoulders drooped. "It can't be," he whispered. "It just can't." One by one, the entire chain of events that led them to this moment began to unravel in his mind. until all he had left was questions. If Raven wasn't the builder, why did the book lead them to the basement? Was he wrong about the calendar? Was there something else he was supposed to see? Impossible. He felt defeated, but this had to be it. The calendar was the only thing that made sense. Just as he had explained to Gina, it was the only thing near the book. Then she found the courthouse picture in the calendar, and he felt it all coming together. They were onto something. But now, as he stood in the courthouse on the courthouse steps, the simplicity of their failure disgusted him. 2 lousy letters. That's all it took to blow his theory out of the water. Unbelievable, he muttered, shaking his head. What? This, he said, motioning to the building before him. It was all a waste of time. Gina saw the broken look on his face. Come on, we better go. They walked slowly down the steps to the street and climbed on their bikes. As they rode away, Nathan was too angry to look back. He just wanted to forget the whole thing. When they got back home, they stopped at the end of Nathan's driveway. Well, thanks for help, he told Gina. I'm sorry I wasted your time. That's okay, she replied, in a curious change of heart. She actually felt bad for him. Ever since they left the library, she was sure she found the link between the book and the calendar. All it took to convince her was tangible proof. Something real. I gotta go, he said. I'll see you tomorrow. Yeah, talk to you then. Nathan rode up the driveway and parked his bike behind the house. The anger he felt earlier was now replaced with feelings of disappointment. For a short time, it felt like they were on to something big, an amazing adventure, one that ended just as it was getting started. Did you have a good day, Nathan? His mother asked him during dinner. Yeah, he mumbled, staring at his spaghetti. It looked like he was eating a bird's nest with 2 large meatballs in it. Is school going okay? Fine. Or maybe a flattened ball of yarn with 2 meaty eyes. When he was finished, he went up to his room to do his homework. Normally, he dreaded this part of the day, but at least it would take his mind off the wasted trip downtown with Gina. As he sat at his desk working, he could hear his parents laughing downstairs in the kitchen. Somewhere off in the distance, there was the whine of the police siren. An airplane flew over the house. Then he heard something else. It was a noise he couldn't identify, coming from somewhere outside his bedroom window. At first, it was very faint, and he ignored it. But then he heard it again, louder this time. He stopped reading. What is that? It was some kind of soft rumbling sound, and he looked up from the school book, listening intently. There it is again, closer. Something was shaking, and it wasn't outside his window. It was here, in the room. He spun around to see what it was, and jumped out of his chair.